New Year's Eve. A hotel ballroom by the river. String lights twisted like vines around fake gold pillars. Jazz quartet in the corner. Waiters weaving through the crowd with trays of champagne and canapes that no one really ate. I remember thinking it all felt expensive, forced, like someone at corporate wanted us to forget how miserable Q4 had been. Emily and I arrived around 8. She looked stunning, honestly. Black velvet dress, off-shoulder, hair curled the way she only did it for events. I wore the same charcoal suit I wore to every formal thing we ever went to, but she still complimented me like I was GQ material. I smiled at her, touched her lower back as we walked in together. We looked like a team. I thought we were one. She was in her element that night, chatting up coworkers, laughing at things that probably weren't funny, tossing around inside jokes from meetings I'd never been part of. I was fine with that. This was her world. I had my own job, my own people. I was here to support her, to smile politely, to listen to the usual "your wife's amazing" compliments from people in overpriced blazers. It was about halfway through the night when I saw it happen. Emily was at a high-top table surrounded by a mix of her department. Most of them half-drunk and already gossiping louder than they realized. Her boss, Paul, was standing beside her, leaning just a little too close. He's the regional director, early 50s, silver hair slicked back, smug in the way that only men with too much authority and no one to check them can be. I'd met him before, shook his hand at a team dinner a year ago. Didn't like him then, liked him less now. I was across the room talking with one of the engineers about hiking trails outside of town when I glanced over and caught the moment. Paul said something to Emily. Something low, something that made her smile in a tight, unreadable way, and then he slid his hand across her thigh. Not a friendly tap. Not a mistake. A slow, smooth movement over her skirt like he'd done it before and expected no consequences. And the way she reacted, she didn't freeze, didn't flinch, just reached down and moved his hand aside like she was brushing off lint. Calm, almost casual, like this wasn't the first time. That part stuck with me more than anything. It wasn't the act, it was the normalization of it. I stood there, holding my drink, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. She looked over at me and smiled like nothing had happened. Gave me this quick wave, then turned back to her group like everything was fine. I didn't move right away. I just kept watching. A few minutes later, I walked over and slid into the group conversation. Emily leaned into me with a smile, placed her hand on my chest like it was all business as usual. Someone made a joke about how Paul should watch out or his wife would find out he was getting handsy again. The others laughed. Paul raised his glass like it was part of the bit. Emily laughed too, bright, polished, performative. Then she leaned toward me and whispered, "Don't worry, it's just a dumb corporate prank. You know how these parties get." She said it like it was nothing, like it was just Paul being inappropriate in a room full of witnesses and nobody really cared. Maybe they didn't. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. Laughed because everyone else did. But I couldn't shake the image. His hand on her thigh, her calm reaction, the way she dismissed it like a mosquito she was used to swatting away. We stayed for another hour. She danced once with one of the marketing guys, made a show of twirling when a fast song came on. I sat at a table nursing a scotch and wondering what kind of workplace culture allowed this kind of thing to slide right past everyone. Then I started wondering if it had slid past me too. If I'd missed signs before this. Things she hadn't said. Things I hadn't asked about. We took a rideshare home around midnight. She rested her head on my shoulder in the back seat, humming along to some 2000s pop song playing low from the driver's phone. I held her hand because that's what I was supposed to do, but my brain wouldn't quiet down. I wanted to ask about Paul again, to revisit the moment, but I didn't want to come off as insecure or controlling. That's what she'd say, right? That I was overreacting? Making a big deal out of nothing? Still, I tried. Did he do that before? I asked, careful not to sound too pointed. Who? She said, already unlocking her phone and scrolling. Paul. She glanced at me, then smirked. You mean that little moment at the table? Oh my God. Don't make it a thing. That's just how he is. He does that to everyone. It's his too many drinks persona. I didn't think it was funny. She sighed. leaned her head back, and stared at the ceiling of the car. Look, I get it. It looked weird. But I handled it. There's nothing to worry about. She said it with such finality that pushing any further felt like starting a fight. So I let it go. But I didn't forget. Not that night. Not the morning after. Not even now. She went to bed as soon as we got home, still buzzed from champagne and social energy. I stayed up, sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, scrolling through social media photos from the party. Most of them were harmless. Group *TS, silly poses, a few boomerangs of people clinking glasses. But in one photo, posted by someone from HR, you could see Paul standing behind Emily with his hand just barely resting on her hip. She was smiling at the camera like nothing was off, like this wasn't a pattern. I didn't comment, didn't like the post, just stared at it for way too long. Maybe I'm the type who overthinks things. Or maybe I've seen enough to recognize when something's off. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just a one-time thing. And if it was, she would have reacted differently. After that night at the hotel, something inside me stayed unsettled. It wasn't just Paul's hand, or even Emily's calm reaction. It was the way she'd brushed it off. Like I was the one who didn't understand the rules of this new world she lived in. Like I didn't belong in that circle anymore. For a few days I tried to shake it off. Told myself I was making a mountain out of a moment. But the more I tried to forget it, the more every little inconsistency in her behavior started coming back. Like puzzle pieces I'd ignored until I finally saw the full picture wasn't what I thought it was. Started with her phone. It used to be just a phone. She'd leave it on the kitchen counter while she cooked, toss it on the bed before a shower, ask me to check her texts when she was driving. But that had changed over the past few months, gradually enough that I hadn't paid close attention. Until now. Lately, the phone never left her side. She brought it into the bathroom, into the closet, tucked it under her pillow at night. At first I figured it was just a phase. Everyone gets weirdly attached to their screen now and then. But now it felt deliberate, strategic. One morning, I reached for her phone by habit when it buzzed on the nightstand, and she practically lunged across the bed to grab it. "It's just work," she said quickly, already typing back. Her voice was too bright, too casual, like she was covering up the reflex. I didn't say anything, just watched. Then there were the workouts. Emily hated working out. For years, the most exercise she ever did was yoga on YouTube or the occasional hike if the weather was perfect and someone else initiated it. But around mid-October, she got serious about wellness. Suddenly she was up at 5:30 a.m. for spin classes and HIIT sessions at this high-end gym that just opened downtown. I remember asking her about it once. "You've never liked the gym?" I said, genuinely curious. "What changed?" She shrugged, pulling on a sleek pair of new leggings. "I don't know. I guess I just wanted to feel stronger. Clear my head. Everyone at work's doing it." It sounded reasonable, but the gym she joined wasn't just any gym. It was the kind that came with eucalyptus towels and rooftop lounges. Their website had photos of influencers with personal trainers, not normal people trying to shed a few pounds. The monthly fee alone was more than we used to spend on groceries. But again, I let it go. At the time, I wanted to be supportive. I wanted her to feel good about herself. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had encouraged her to join. Someone she wanted to look good for. Then came the wardrobe. Emily had always had style. She liked clothes, but she wasn't flashy. Most of her closet was practical, professional staples, a few statement pieces, nothing extravagant. But somewhere between September and December, a new side of her emerged. Designer heels I didn't recognize. A sleek leather bag that cost more than my laptop. Delicate gold jewelry that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen her wear before. At first, I thought she was just treating herself. She'd gotten a raise after all. But it wasn't just the clothes, it was the timing. She started buying things before business trips. Always with vague explanations. Client dinners, she'd say. Strategy retreats. But the trips were oddly timed, almost always aligning with weekends, and always to major cities where her boss, Paul, just so happened to post photos from. I didn't follow Paul directly. Why would I? But Emily had shown me one of his posts once. Something about kicking off Q1 with the view we deserve, next to a picture of a beachside resort. The caption was dated the same weekend she'd flown to meet with a client in that exact city. That was when I started paying closer attention. I didn't want to be the jealous husband, the overbearing guy who accuses without proof. But I couldn't ignore the way things had shifted. Even her coworkers, the ones I used to joke with at holiday parties and see at game nights, had become standoffish around me. It happened subtly. At first they were just busy, distracted. Then they stopped asking about me, stopped making eye contact. One guy from her department, Tom, I think, literally turned around and walked the other way at the grocery store when he saw me in the frozen foods aisle. That's when I knew. People knew. Not everyone, maybe, but enough of them. Enough to change the atmosphere. I started noticing the phone logs. Not hers, mine. I wasn't trying to snoop, not yet. But she'd started deleting call history, incoming and outgoing. One night, I glanced at her phone when it was charging and noticed her recents were practically empty. Aside from a few names that didn't match the frequency I remembered. Her lock screen had changed too. Used to be a picture of us from a trip to Maine. Now it was just a photo of the sky. Moody, abstract, impersonal. And she was tired all the time. But not in the normal way. She'd come home from these trips or client dinners with this mix of energy and guilt. Like she was putting on a show, overcompensating. She'd bring back souvenirs, little jokes from her coworkers, say things like, "You would have loved this hotel lobby," as if to include me in something I wasn't part of. One night, she came home and kissed me too hard. I know that sounds like a stupid thing to notice, but it felt forced, like a performance. Her eyes darted away after, and she rushed off to the shower. I sat there on the couch, thinking about the past year. We used to have rhythm, inside jokes. Even when we argued, there was something honest about it. But now I felt like I was talking to someone running on a script, and I wasn't part of the writer's room anymore. That same week, I found a receipt in the trash. It was from a wine bar downtown. Not cheap, not casual. The date on it matched a night she said she was in a conference room until midnight. I didn't say anything then either. I just stared at the date and the total and wondered if Paul liked red or white. I wanted to believe there was still a version of the story where none of this meant what it looked like. Where I was just misreading coincidences. Where maybe she was overwhelmed, overworked, trying to find herself, or something equally vague but forgivable. But every time I reached for that optimism, something else would slip through the cracks. Perfume bottle I hadn't seen before. A work badge left in her car with a check-in time that didn't match what she told me. Her refusal to let me drop her off at the airport anymore. "It's too early," she'd say. Or, "Traffic will be a nightmare." Then she'd Uber and send me a sleepy selfie from the gate like a preemptive defense. It all added up to one truth I didn't want to admit but couldn't ignore anymore. Something was happening. And if I didn't find out what it was soon, I was going to lose my mind trying to pretend everything was still fine. It was a Tuesday night in January when the pretending stopped. Emily had said she was meeting a client for dinner. Some out-of-town firm, big deal, can't miss kind of night. She kissed me on the cheek as she left, said she'd be home late. I told her to drive safe, watched her pull out of the driveway in her black sedan, headlights slicing through the dark, and then I sat back on the couch and stared at the front door like it might tell me something. For weeks, I'd been swimming in suspicion, drowning in it really. Every explanation felt thinner, every coincidence more calculated. I hadn't confronted her, didn't want to fight without proof. But I'd prepared. A month earlier, I'd installed a GPS tracker inside the spare key fob she kept in her purse. It was something I told myself I'd never actually use. But that night, I opened the app the moment she left the neighborhood. Not out of impulse, out of necessity. I expected to see the pin hovering near a downtown restaurant or a hotel with a conference room. Something that might technically fit her story. What I didn't expect was for it to land on a residential building. A loft, downtown. No business signage. No valet. Just 3 stories of brick, glass, and quiet. I stared at the pin for a full minute, hoping it was a glitch. Then I grabbed my coat and keys. The drive was short, 15 minutes, give or take. Long enough to question what I was doing. Short enough that I didn't stop. I didn't call her. Didn't text. I just parked across the street from the building and waited. It was a modern complex, big windows, open floor plans, the kind of place you rent if you want to impress someone. Warm light glowed from the second floor, behind thin, sheer curtains that didn't do much to hide what was going on inside. And there she was, Emily, my wife, wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, sitting barefoot on a mid-century couch with her legs folded to the side, laughing with Paul. I recognized him instantly, his silhouette, his posture, the way he leaned in with one hand on the backrest behind her. He wasn't dressed like a boss. No blazer, just a collared shirt, sleeves rolled up, wine glass in hand like he lived there. Maybe he did. They weren't working. There were no laptops, no files, no client in sight. Just two people sitting far too close in a space that looked like it had already become familiar. At one point, he stood and walked to the kitchen. She followed. He poured more wine. She wrapped her arms loosely around his waist from behind, rested her chin on his shoulder. They stood like that for a long beat. Then they kissed. Not tentative. Not experimental. It was the kind of kiss that came with practice. Muscle memory. Months, not moments. I didn't realize my hands were shaking until I almost dropped my phone trying to take a picture. I didn't want to. I hated that I was doing it. But I needed it. I needed to see it again later to make sure I hadn't imagined it. That I hadn't built it up in my mind like some paranoid fantasy. I took 2 photos. One when she kissed him. One when he kissed her back and she didn't pull away. Then I sat there in my car. Engine off. Parked in the dark. Breathing like I'd just run a marathon I hadn't trained for. There was no more guessing. No more puzzle pieces. It was all there in front of me, undeniable and cruel in its clarity. The strange, the moment you finally see the thing you feared most. You think it'll break you, but instead, it freezes everything. Time slows down. Feelings go silent. All the rage, pain, betrayal, they wait their turn. What comes first is clarity. When I drove home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't punch the steering wheel like some character in a drama. I just drove. Calm. Cold. The way you do when you've already crossed the emotional threshold and there's no going back. She came home around midnight. I was in bed, lights off, pretending to sleep. She tiptoed into the room, as if that mattered anymore. Slipped under the covers without touching me. Her body was warm. The smell of wine lingered faintly in her hair. I stared at the ceiling for hours while her breathing slowed. And then I got up. In the silence of the early morning, while she slept, I moved through the house like a ghost. I pulled out my laptop, my old notebooks, and the folder I'd started keeping months earlier. The one I'd hoped I'd never need. Receipts, hotel bookings, timestamps, airline confirmations for work trips that didn't match up with her boss's public travel schedule. I found Instagram posts from Paul at resorts, tagged with dates that overlapped her client weekends. The backgrounds didn't match the cities she claimed to be in. I checked the office building's keycard logs. I'd seen an old email with the link when she worked from my desktop months ago. I still had access. She hadn't swiped in on half the nights she claimed to be pulling late hours. It all added up. I matched the receipts from the wine bar she liked with charges on our joint account. Cross-checked the GPS pings from her phone backup. Yes, I'd saved them once I started suspecting. Most of them landed at the same loft. Over and over. She was consistent, if nothing else. By sunrise, I had a folder with digital copies of everything. I printed a hard copy, too, labeled each section. I didn't know why. Maybe I wanted it to be clean, organized. Maybe I needed to feel in control of something. The hardest part was the photos from that night. I transferred them from my phone to a flash drive. I didn't look at them again, not yet. But knowing they were there gave me leverage. Not for revenge. Not to hurt her. But to protect myself. Because I remembered the prenup. Signed 7 years ago before we merged finances. Her father insisted on it back then. She had more assets. But I had insisted on one clause, one line, barely discussed at the time. Fidelity is grounds for immediate asset separation. At the time, it felt symbolic. She even joked about it. "Well, I guess I'll have to be good then," she'd said with a smile. Now it felt like a lifeline. I looked at her as she slept that morning, peaceful, unaware, maybe even content in her own delusion that she was still in control. But something had shifted, not just in my understanding of her, in my understanding of myself. I wasn't going to rage. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to ask why. I already knew the answer. Or maybe I didn't care anymore. She had made a decision. Now it was my turn. I didn't sleep for the next 3 nights. It wasn't that I couldn't. It was that I didn't want to. Sleep meant rest, and rest meant vulnerability. I couldn't afford that anymore. Not now. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what I'd confirmed. There was something comforting about staying awake. About being alert. Watching. Thinking. Planning. Emily moved through those days like everything was fine. She'd hum while she got dressed. Make smoothies in the morning. Sit across from me at the kitchen island and ask about my schedule like she hadn't just spent the night at her boss's apartment pretending to be someone else's wife. I nodded along. Answered when appropriate. Smiled when I had to. But inside, the world I'd lived in was already gone. Something had cracked and split open inside me the moment I saw her kiss him, and there was no sealing it shut again. Oddly enough, I didn't feel pain. Not the kind you expect. What I felt was something else. Emptier. Colder. Like I was standing in the ruins of a house I once lived in, sifting through the pieces not to fix it, but to make sure I never built the same thing again. The silence between us changed, too. It wasn't awkward. It was intentional. I stopped asking questions. She stopped volunteering details. And the less we spoke, the more she filled the space with her usual noise. Stories about new projects, meetings that went long, people who were jealous of her ideas. She still smiled at me like we were fine. She still reached for my hand in public. She still told our friends everything was great. It made my skin crawl, the performance of it all. But I let it play out. I watched it like a bad movie I already knew the ending to. While she kept pretending, I kept preparing. During the days I worked. At night I gathered. I built a file on my personal laptop, encrypted and backed up to a secure drive. It wasn't just the photos or the receipts anymore. I started pulling metadata from her social posts, extracting timestamps and geolocation. I used a plugin to view deleted messages from our shared cloud backup, and what surfaced was more than enough. Flirtatious texts, late-night jokes, "Can't wait to see you again" messages sent during times she told me she was stuck in meetings. Some from Paul. Some from a number I didn't recognize, likely a burner or another line he used. I wasn't even surprised anymore. There were call logs, too. Long ones. 40, 50 minutes at a time. Mostly around 11 p.m. The time she used to spend reading in bed next to me. Only now I knew she wasn't reading. She was whispering, laughing softly into the phone with the door closed. I found one video in her photo archive, short, maybe 7 seconds. Just a pan of a hotel balcony, sunset over a beach. I froze it, enhanced it, checked the buildings in the background, then confirmed the location through reverse image tools. Cancun. Not the client trip to Austin she told me about that weekend. She was in Mexico, with him, and I had proof. It was all too neat, too perfectly damning. Every lie cross-checked, every story undone. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't going to explode or expose or humiliate her. I wanted freedom, but I wanted it clean. That's when I called a lawyer. Not a family friend. Not someone we knew. A cold, strategic, high-end firm that specialized in marital cases where one party held the cards. I sent them a portion of the documentation, blacked out names, redacted identifying info. Within an hour, they called me back. "You're sitting on gold," the associate said bluntly. "If even half of this is verifiable, the prenuptial clause will work entirely in your favor. You'll walk away with everything." That was the moment I felt the first flicker of peace. Not joy, not vindication, just peace. Like the ground had finally stopped shifting under me. We scheduled a formal intake. I met with them 2 days later. I brought the whole file in a sealed folder, printed and sorted with dividers. Call logs, message transcripts, GPS histories, card transactions, her fake itineraries, layered next to Paul's real ones. It all matched, down to the dates, down to the hours. They walked me through the strategy, division of assets, financial protections, the clause about infidelity that would expedite everything. I wouldn't owe her alimony. I wouldn't lose the house. Our joint accounts could be frozen until a settlement was reached. If we move efficiently, the lawyer said, you could be done with this in under 90 days. She won't see it coming. And she didn't. Emily was still living in the same reality she'd created. Still scheduling Pilates at 6 a.m. Still meal prepping for us on Sundays like the act alone could stitch together what had unraveled behind it. She bought a new bottle of wine and left it on the table with a note that said, "Movie night soon?" I smiled when I saw it, then slid the bottle aside. She didn't know the paperwork had already started, that the accounts were being flagged, that our mortgage was being restructured under my name, that our lawyer, my lawyer, had already subpoenaed her office's keycard data to confirm the lie she told in her quarterly review. She was living on borrowed time, and I let her, because I needed her comfortable, predictable, complacent. So I nodded when she told me about a big pitch she was leading next week. I asked how her coworkers were doing. I let her ramble about color-coded Excel sheets and office drama. She talked like everything was still hers. But it wasn't. Piece by piece, I was dismantling the life she thought she'd keep. I remember the first time I saw her take a call in the hallway, just out of view, speaking in a hushed voice. Normally I would have felt rage. But this time I just listened, calm, detached. I didn't hear much, just her tone. Light, rehearsed, sweet in a way she hadn't spoken to me in months. I didn't confront her. I just opened the app and watched the tracker light up. Same loft, same pattern. She still thought she was being clever. But now I wasn't chasing the truth. I had it. I was planning the exit. At night, I'd lie in bed and listen to her breathe beside me. I'd count the seconds between each breath. It made me feel anchored, still, in control. One night, she rolled over and rested her hand on my chest, eyes still closed. "I love you," she mumbled. I stared at the ceiling. She didn't mean it. Not because she didn't feel something, but because she didn't even know who she was saying it to anymore. It wasn't me she loved. It was the life, the story, the security of being adored while entertaining something else in the shadows. But the shadows were disappearing, and soon the story would end. The strange part was how easy it became to act normal. I woke up, made coffee, folded laundry, answered emails. I kissed her cheek when I left the house and asked her if she needed anything from the store. I watched movies beside her, laughed at her stories. I even rubbed her shoulders one night when she said she felt tense. And all the while, I was preparing for the end of our marriage like it was just another project. That's what it had become, in a way, a quiet operation. Not fueled by anger, not driven by grief, just precision, strategy, steps. I had already done the emotional heavy lifting in the weeks before. The shock was gone. The heartbreak had calcified into something solid and cold. It allowed me to move through the days with a focus I hadn't known I was capable of. The house was the first priority. Our prenup gave me a clear path. Infidelity shifted ownership of shared property into my favor. The paperwork had already started. Our attorney filed for an expedited division of assets under the terms of breach. By the end of the month, the deed would be in my name. She didn't know yet. She still talked about repainting the living room and possibly redoing the patio in the spring. I nodded when she brought it up. Blue would be nice, I said. Inside, I was calculating how soon I could get the locks changed after serving the papers. The bank was next. Our joint accounts were frozen. Quietly, legally. I opened a separate account in my name, routed my paychecks there, disconnected any autopays she was tied to. She wouldn't notice right away. She rarely checked the balances. Her income always hit a different account for her personal expenses, and the joint fund was mostly used for bills I'd already redirected. The trust was more complex. Our attorney had advised that I move the majority of our liquid assets, savings, emergency funds, investments, into a revocable living trust under my sole control. Protected by the prenup. Future-facing. Locked from any claims. It was like erecting a wall around what she no longer had access to. Every step I took was a step she didn't see coming. And that was the point. The timing had to be perfect. Not just legally, but emotionally. She was still too comfortable. Still too convinced that her world was secure. That I was the same man I'd always been, stable, predictable, passive. She underestimated how much clarity changes a person. One evening, just a few days after the paperwork started moving behind the scenes, she came home with takeout and a bottle of wine. Said she felt nostalgic. Wanted to reconnect. She lit candles. Put on one of our old playlists. Wore that soft Berg *NDY sweater I used to love. I could see she was trying. Or maybe pretending. Maybe the guilt was catching up to her and she was clawing for a reset button. But we were past that. Still, I played along. We ate. We talked. She made jokes about work and told me a story about a coworker who tripped in the elevator. I laughed when I was supposed to. Asked questions at the right times. She smiled more that night than she had in weeks. After dinner, she leaned against me on the couch and said, "We should go away this weekend. Just the two of us. Clear our heads." I kissed the top of her head. "Let's talk about it in the morning." She never brought it up again. Probably because the next few mornings, I was already gone before she woke up. Early errands. Unscheduled coffee with a client. In reality, I was meeting with the legal team, signing documents, checking on the filing status. The date of service was coming. She still didn't know, and she still wasn't done lying. 3 days later, she told me she had a training seminar on the other side of town. I smiled, nodded, told her to drive safe, watched her pack a small overnight bag. She was almost cheerful, like things were finally balancing again. I watched her leave, then checked the tracker. Downtown. Same loft. Same coordinates. Like clockwork. I didn't follow her this time. I didn't need to. That chapter was closed. But I opened the app anyway and watched the dot move. It was almost meditative now. A reminder. A confirmation. That night, I emailed the final batch of documents to our attorney. The trust was fully active. The house was nearly in my name. The court date for preliminary hearing had been scheduled. She had no idea, and yet she kept trying to act like nothing was wrong, like we were slowly, quietly repairing. She made plans for spring. She talked about maybe getting a dog. One evening, she even suggested we take ballroom dancing lessons, something she'd never shown interest in before. I said, maybe, that could be fun. Inside, I was scheduling a locksmith for the week after she'd be served. There's a certain cruelty in acting like nothing's happening while everything is. But I didn't feel cruel. I felt calculated, focused. It wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting myself. My future. My sanity. The closer we got to the date, the calmer I became. The panic that had gripped me in December was gone. I didn't second-guess anymore. I didn't wonder if I was making the right choice. I just moved forward. I had the advantage of knowing the timeline. She didn't. That gave me space to be deliberate, to watch, to listen. Every time she told a story that contradicted something I knew, I nodded and stored it away. Every time she smiled with just a little too much effort, I noted how quickly it faded when she thought I wasn't looking. One night, I watched her sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling her phone with a glass of wine, eyes flicking to the screen like she was waiting for a message that wasn't coming. She looked tired, hollow, a little lost. I almost felt something. Almost. But then I remembered the kiss, the hotel, the client dinners, the way she looked at him like she used to look at me, and the flicker of pity disappeared. The truth was, she'd been gone a long time. The body was still here, the habits, the routines. But the real connection, the real version of us, had ended the moment she let someone else become her secret. She was still speaking in future tense. But I was already living in the past perfect. We had something. We were close. We used to be in love. Now I was building the off-ramp. and she was going to see it all at once. The night before the service date, she made dinner. Homemade. Her attempt at carbonara. Something she hadn't cooked in months. She poured 2 glasses of wine and said, "To us?" raising hers in a toast. I clinked glasses. "To us?" I echoed. We ate in silence after that. A strange, heavy quiet. Not tense. Not uncomfortable. Just final. She didn't know it yet, but that was our last meal together as husband and wife. And I wasn't mourning it. I was ready. At the next corporate event, silence followed her like a shadow. Colleagues avoided her. Phones passed from hand to hand, photos, receipts, hotel records. HR had the full file. So did Paul's wife. Emily smiled through it all, not yet realizing the collapse had big asterisk N. She searched faces for warmth and found only cold detachment. The room that once embraced her now stood still, judgment thick in the air. Her world wasn't breaking. It was already broken. She just hadn't noticed yet. She came home in an elegant dress, still pretending nothing had changed. I was waiting, envelope in hand. Divorce papers notarized. The locks had been changed. Her things boxed. Accounts frozen. For once, she had no script. No lie. Just stunned silence. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I simply watched as she realized the performance was over. When she left, I sat alone in the quiet. It wasn't sadness I felt. It was peace. The storm had passed. The truth had done its work.